May 24th, 1945. A man is dying in a hospital bed in Gusen, Austria. He is bleeding from 3 bullet wounds in his stomach. His hands, the same hands that signed death orders for tens of thousands of human beings, are trembling. American military officers sit beside him with notebooks open, and for 6 straight hours, this man talks. He confesses to gassings, to freezing murders, to dogs trained to tear prisoners apart, to allowing his own young son to shoot at living human beings for entertainment. He names Heinrich Himmler. He names the Gestapo chief. He names the architects of genocide and places himself right beside them. Then, 1 hour and 30 minutes after the interrogation ends, he dies. But that's not the shocking part. The shocking part is what the survivors did to his body after. His name was Franz Ziereis.
He was the commandant of Mauthausen, one of the most brutal concentration camps in the entire Nazi system. And his story is a masterclass in what happens when a system turns ordinary men into instruments of industrial-scale murder. This is that story, and it doesn't end quietly. Right now, before we go a single second further, if you found this video, you're exactly who this channel was built for. Nazi history profiles exist for one reason: to make sure the men who ran the Holocaust are never forgotten, never romanticized, and never allowed to fade into comfortable silence. We go deep, we go dark, and we tell the truth. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because every week we pull another name from the shadows of history and force it back into the light. Now, Army, let's get into Franz Ziereis. January 30th, 1933.
Berlin. Adolf Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany. He has been trying to seize power since his failed beer hall putsch of 1923, for which he served 9 months in prison. While imprisoned, he dictated Mein Kampf, his blueprint for a racially pure German empire. Most people dismissed it as the ravings of a fringe extremist. They were catastrophically wrong. Within weeks of taking power, Hitler's government began stripping Jewish citizens of their legal rights. Within months, on March 22, 1933, the first concentration camp opened at Dachau, just outside Munich. It was built not for Jews initially, but for political opponents, communists, socialists, journalists, clergy, anyone who dared push back.
Berlin. Adolf Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany. He's been trying to seize power since his failed beer hall putsch of 1923, for which he served 9 months in prison. While imprisoned, he dictated Mein Kampf, his blueprint for a racially pure German empire. Most people dismissed it as the ravings of a fringe extremist. They were catastrophically wrong. Within weeks of taking power, Hitler's government began stripping Jewish citizens of their legal rights. Within months, on March 22, 1933, the first concentration camp opened at Dachau, just outside Munich. It was built not for Jews initially, but for political opponents, communists, socialists, journalists, clergy, anyone who dared push back.
Death's Head units were founded in 1934 by Theodor Eicke, the man who personally oversaw the murder of Ernst Röhm during the Night of the Long Knives, and later became the first commandant of Dachau. Eicke's training philosophy was simple and terrifying. Prisoners were not human beings. They were enemies of the state. They were to be broken, exploited, and destroyed. Any guard who showed mercy was weak, and weakness in Eicke's world was a punishable offense. At the outbreak of World War II, the Death's Head units numbered 24,000 men. By January 1945, that number had ballooned to 40,000. A trained, ideologically hardened force deployed across the entire concentration camp system. Ziereis was one of its most dedicated products. March 11th to 13th, 1938. Hitler annexed Austria in a move called the Anschluss, the connection.
Ziereis marched in with Death's Head mobile units, participating in Germany's first act of territorial conquest since taking power. For many Austrians, it was a celebration. Hitler was Austrian-born, and thousands lined the streets of Vienna to cheer him as a returning hero. The footage is chilling. Crowds stretching as far as the eye can see, arms raised in salute, flowers thrown at passing Wehrmacht columns. But for Austria's approximately 200,000 Jews, the Anschluss was the first night of a long nightmare.
Within hours of the annexation, organized violence erupted across the country. Austrian Nazis, who had been operating underground for years, came out into the open. Jewish men and women were dragged from their homes and forced to scrub pro-independence slogans off Viennese pavements with toothbrushes, while crowds jeered and photographed them.
Synagogues were vandalized. Businesses were looted. Jewish professionals, doctors, lawyers, professors were fired on the spot. Long lines of terrified families formed outside foreign embassies, begging for visas to anywhere. The governments of Britain, France, and the United States watched and showed silence. Hitler noted that silence carefully. It told him everything he needed to know about how far he could go. February 9th, 1939, by direct order of Theodor Eicke, inspector of concentration camps, Franz Ziereis was appointed commandant of Mauthausen Concentration Camp, located in the granite hills of Upper Austria, 20 kilometers east of Linz, carved into the landscape like a wound. His predecessor had been dismissed for being too lenient with prisoners. Ziereis had no such weakness.
Mauthausen had opened in August 1938, initially to house German and Austrian men deemed enemies of the Nazi state. The defining feature of the camp was its granite quarry and the stairs of death, 186 steep, jagged, irregular stone steps carved into a cliff face. Every day, starving prisoners were forced to carry granite blocks weighing up to 50 kilograms up those stairs while guards watched from above. Those who stumbled were beaten. Those who collapsed were shot. Their paperwork was stamped with 4 clinical words: shot while attempting to escape. It was systematic. It was documented. And Ziereis signed off on every bit of it. Under his command, Mauthausen expanded into a vast network. The Gusen camp opened nearby in May 1940.
Dozens of subcamps fanned out across Upper Austria. All roads led back to Ziereis. By 1941, a gas chamber had been constructed at Mauthausen. Prisoners were murdered in groups. Methods documented by survivors and in Ziereis's own confession included gassing, starvation, lethal benzene injections directly into the heart, and exposure. Prisoners stripped naked and forced to stand outside in minus 12 degrees Celsius temperatures until they froze to death. A trained German shepherd named Lord was kept at the camp. Prisoners were deliberately driven into its path. Some were mauled to death. Multiple survivors testified after the war that Ziereis allowed his young son to shoot at prisoners with a small caliber firearm as a form of sport.
Yet the boy was in elementary school. And one of the darkest authenticated details of Mauthausen, tattooed skin was reportedly harvested from prisoners and fashioned into personal objects, a practice documented at multiple Nazi camps and confirmed in post-war tribunal evidence. This was not chaos. This was not the random cruelty of rogue guards acting without authorization. This was policy, organized, funded, commanded. Between August 1938 and May 1945, an estimated 197,000 prisoners passed through the Mauthausen system. At least 95,000 died, more than 14,000 of them Jewish. The death rate at Mauthausen was among the highest of any Nazi camp outside the dedicated extermination centers. April 1945, the Third Reich is disintegrating. Soviet forces are closing on Berlin from the east. American and British forces are flooding in from the west. Germany's cities are burning. Inside Mauthausen, the SS knows the end is near and doubles down on murder. In April 1945, capos at Gusen, prisoner functionaries acting on direct SS orders, beat several hundred inmates to death in a single month. On the final days of April, the SS murdered 650 critically ill prisoners with poison gas in a barracks, one of the last mass gassing operations carried out anywhere in the Nazi camp system. SS leadership and Upper Austrian Nazi officials also seriously discussed forcing surviving prisoners into the underground armaments tunnels built by slave labor and detonating the tunnels with explosives, a plan that would have buried thousands alive. The plan collapsed only because the Nazi command structure itself was collapsing.
On May 3rd, when 1945, 2 days before American forces reached the camp, Franz Ziereis fled. He took his wife. He vanished into the mountains of Upper Austria, hiding in a remote hunting lodge in the Fern mountain range. For 20 days he hid. On May 23, 1945, American soldiers found him. He ran. He was shot 3 times in the stomach. They brought the dying Ziereis back to a U.S. military hospital in Gusen, back to the camp he had commanded. The following day, May 24th, American military interrogators sat beside his bed. For more than 6 hours, Franz Ziereis talked. He confessed to gas chambers. He confessed to the benzene injections. He confessed to the freezing murders and the forced marches and the beatings and the shootings.
He named Heinrich Himmler, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, and when Heinrich Müller, Gestapo chief, as the men who had ordered the final solution from above. He admitted he had killed prisoners with his own hands. He described the stares of death. He described the dog. He described the winter nights when naked men were made to stand in the open air until their hearts stopped. 1 hour and 30 minutes after the interrogation concluded, Franz Ziereis was dead. He was 39 years old. What came next was not in any military manual. The survivors of Mauthausen, men who had been starved, beaten, gassed, frozen, and worked to the edge of death, took the body of Franz Ziereis. They stripped it. They carried it to the barbed wire fence at Gusen. They hung it there. Across his back, in red paint, they wrote Heil Hitler. On his body, they painted swastikas. And there he stayed, dangling from the wire he had once used to cage human beings. For several days, his torso and legs swaying in the Austrian spring air. A once powerful man, reduced to a rotting symbol. He remained there until the stench of his decomposing body became unbearable, and only then did a U.S. Army officer order his removal. No ceremony, no grave marker of note, no mourners. Just the wire and the silence of 95,000 dead. Franz Ziereis was not a cartoon villain. He was not born evil. He was a carpenter's son from Munich who made choices, deliberate, documented, monstrous choices at every single step of his career. That is what makes his story essential viewing, because the Holocaust was not the work of supernatural evil. It was the work of human beings, people with names, ranks, families, hidden career ambitions, who chose cruelty and called it duty. At Nazi History Profiles, we name those people. We document what they did. We refuse to let them disappear. Subscribe to this channel if you believe history must be remembered to be prevented. Share this video. Comment below. What do you think justice looked like when those survivors painted that body on the wire? We'll see you in the next one.